In 1987, a psychiatric hospital in rural Ohio received a patient they were not expecting. She arrived on a Tuesday. No ID, no next of kin, no history. The admitting nurse logged her as a Jane Doe because there was nothing else to call her. She was estimated to be somewhere between 30 and 40 years old. She was calm, cooperative. She answered every question put to her with a quiet, measured politeness that the staff found unusual, not because it was strange for a patient to be polite, but because of what she was polite about. She was polite when she explained that she had been living in the walls of Briar Hill Psychiatric Center for the past 6 years. Not near the hospital, not on the grounds, in the walls, behind the plaster, inside the building itself. The attending physician, a man named Dr. Edmund Crail, noted in his intake report that the woman showed no signs of delusion. She wasn't agitated. She didn't appear to believe something false. She spoke about the walls the way a person speaks about an apartment they once rented. Matter of fact, with the occasional specific detail that made it harder and harder to dismiss. She knew the layout of every floor. She knew which pipes ran warm in winter. She knew the name of a janitor who had retired 4 years earlier and had never been mentioned in any public record. Dr. Crail wrote one line at the bottom of his intake notes that evening, which investigators would later return to again and again. He wrote, "I am not sure this woman is lying." Briar Hill Psychiatric Center opened in 1941. It was built on the eastern edge of Hallow County, Ohio, on a plot of land that had previously been farmland. And before that, if the older county records were to be believed, something else entirely. Though those records were incomplete, and what they described was difficult to interpret. The building itself was large, 4 stories, 2 wings extending from a central rotunda, basement level used for storage and in the early decades for treatments that would later be discontinued. By 1987, it housed approximately 240 patients across various wards, with a staff of around 80. It was not a famous hospital. It was not notorious. It was the kind of institution that exists in every state, in every country. Functional, underfunded, largely ignored by the outside world, which meant, as investigators would later point out, that it was exactly the kind of place where something could go wrong for a very long time before anyone noticed. The woman who staff began calling Eleanor because she did not object to the name and they needed something to call her, was placed in Ward C on the 2nd floor. Standard observation protocol. She was given a bed, a set of clothes, 3 meals a day. She participated in group sessions. She was quiet in the evenings. She slept, as far as the night staff could tell, like anyone else. But she asked questions. Not demanding questions. Not the kind that set off alarm bells. Small questions asked casually, the way you might ask someone about a mutual friend you haven't seen in a while. She asked a nurse named Patricia Owens about a patient who had been on Ward C 3 years earlier, a man named Robert Hess. She described him accurately, his height, his habit of pacing the corridor in the early morning, the particular way he laughed. Patricia confirmed that yes, a man matching that description had been on the ward. He had been discharged in 1984. Eleanor nodded as if this was information she already had but was checking. She asked an orderly named Jean about a fire that had happened in the East Wing storage room in 1983. A small fire, quickly contained. never reported to the press. Gene confirmed it. He had been on shift that night. He had never spoken about it publicly. Eleanor said she remembered the smell. By the end of Eleanor's second week at Briar Hill, Dr. Crail had begun a secondary file. Not her medical file. A separate notebook kept in his desk drawer, in which he logged every accurate piece of institutional knowledge she demonstrated, though knowledge she should not have had, could not have had, unless she had been exactly where she said she had been. By the end of the third week, the notebook was 40 pages long. Here is what made the Eleanor case different from other cases of this type. And there are other cases of this type, more than most people realize, of individuals discovered living inside institutions, inside the spaces between the official spaces. What made Eleanor different was not that she had survived there. It was what she said she had seen. Dr. Crail, in week 4, asked her directly. He had built enough of a relationship with her by that point, he felt, to ask the question he had been circling since the night she arrived. He asked her why she had come out. Eleanor looked at him for a long time, long enough that he noted the pause in his notebook, with a specific duration. 11 seconds. He counted. Then she said, "Because something else moved in." She said it the way you say something when you have been waiting a long time to say it and are not sure you will be believed. Dr. Crail asked her to explain. She said that for 6 years, she had lived in the spaces between the walls without being detected. She had learned the rhythms of the building. She had learned which sections of corridor were never monitored, which access panels were never checked, which basement passages connected to which utility corridors. She had, in her words, become part of the building's routine, invisible because expected, unnoticed because the building had adjusted to her the way a body adjusts to something foreign, surrounding it, incorporating it, making it part of the system. She said she had been safe. She said that approximately 8 months before she walked into the admitting office, something changed. She didn't know what it was. She never saw it directly. But she began to notice things, sounds that didn't correspond to the building's normal rhythms, movements and sections of the wall space she had never used and had believed were structurally inaccessible. A smell. And here she paused again, searching for the right word. A smell like copper and something older than copper. Like metal that has been wet for a very long time. She said she began to find things moved. Small things at first. A tin she used for storage. A piece of cloth she had laid down as a marker. Not missing, just moved. Slightly. Precisely enough that she knew the movement was not accidental. She said she began to hear something following her through the walls. Not footsteps, not exactly. More like the sound of something learning to move the way she moved. Mimicking the pattern. Getting better at it over time. She said that in the final weeks before she came out, she stopped sleeping, and that on the last night, she had been in a section of wall space adjacent to Ward D, the long-term care ward on the 3rd floor, when she heard from somewhere very close a sound she had never heard before in 6 years of living inside that building. She heard someone else breathing. Not a patient, not a staff member. The breathing was not coming from the ward side of the wall. It was coming from inside the wall with her. She walked out the next morning and never went back. Dr. Crail sat with this for a long time after their session ended. He was a rational man. He had spent 20 years in psychiatric medicine. He did not believe in monsters. He believed in trauma, in delusion, in the extraordinary lengths the human mind will go to in order to construct a narrative that explains an experience it cannot otherwise process. But Eleanor was not delusional. He was more certain of that now than he had been on the first night. Her knowledge of the building was too specific, too accurate, too consistently verifiable. She had been in those walls. That was not in question. The question was what else had been in there with her. On a Thursday evening in the 5th week of Eleanor's stay, an orderly named Marcus Webb was doing a routine check of the 3rd-floor corridor when he noticed something. One of the access panels, a small metal door set into the wall near the end of Ward D, used by maintenance to reach the pipe infrastructure, was ajar. Marcus noted it, assumed a maintenance worker had left it open and pushed it closed. He logged it in the nightly report as a minor issue. He did not look inside. 2 days later, a patient in Ward D, a long-term resident named Carl Mueller, who'd been at Briar Hill for 11 years, told his attending nurse that he had been hearing sounds inside his wall for the past several months. He said it had started quietly. Scratching, he thought at first. Then something more deliberate. He said that in the past few weeks, it had changed. He said it sounded now like something was pressing itself against the inside of the wall. Flat against it. Still. Just listening. Carl Mueller was a paranoid schizophrenic. His nurse logged the complaint as a symptom exacerbation and adjusted his medication. No one connected it to Eleanor. Dr. Crail connected it to Eleanor. He read the nurse's note the following morning and felt something he would later describe in the account he wrote privately after leaving Briar Hill as the specific coldness of a thing you hoped was not true, becoming harder to dismiss. He requested a maintenance inspection of the wall spaces adjacent to Ward D. The maintenance supervisor, a man named Pete Garland, conducted the inspection on a Friday afternoon. He accessed 3 panels on the Ward D corridor and 1 in the adjacent utility room. In the utility room panel, he found evidence of recent habitation. Not old habitation, recent. A cleared space approximately 4 feet by 6 feet. No food, no clothing, no personal items of any kind. Just a cleared space. And on the floor of that space, in the dust, what appeared to be the impression of something that had been lying there, lying very still, for a very long time. Pete Garland described the impression as roughly human in shape. Roughly. He said the proportions were slightly off in a way he couldn't quite articulate. He said the arm impressions were longer than he would have expected. He said whatever had been lying there had been facing the wall that separated the utility space from Ward D, facing the patients on the other side, just lying there, in the dark, facing them. The hospital's administration, when Dr. Crail brought this to them, made the decision that would define the rest of this story. They decided not to call the police. They decided not to inform the patients or the majority of the staff. They decided to conduct a quiet, internal sweep of the building's wall spaces and to resolve the situation, whatever the situation was, without involving outside authorities. Their reasoning, as best as investigators were later able to reconstruct it, was financial. Briar Hill was already operating under a funding review. A public incident of this nature, an unknown entity living inside the walls of a psychiatric hospital, would have ended the institution. They believed they could handle it quietly. They were wrong. The internal sweep, conducted over a weekend in November 1987 by a small team of maintenance workers, found evidence of habitation in 11 separate locations throughout the building. Cleared spaces, impressions in dust. In 2 locations, scratch marks on the interior surfaces of the wall. Long, deliberate marks, grouped in sets, which one of the maintenance workers initially thought were tally marks, before he counted them and realized that they didn't resolve into any recognizable numerical pattern. They were not counting days, they were not counting anything that anyone could identify. In the basement level, in a section of crawl space that had been sealed off since a structural repair in 1979 and had not been accessed since, the team found something that caused the maintenance supervisor to stop the sweep and refuse to continue without a written explanation from hospital administration of exactly what they were looking for and why. Pete Garland never gave a formal account of what he found in that basement crawl space. He left Briar Hill the following Monday and did not return. He did not speak publicly about the experience. When a journalist attempted to contact him in 1994, following a regional newspaper article about Briar Hill's closure, Garland declined to comment. The journalist noted that Garland, when reached by phone, said only one thing before hanging up. He said, "Don't go looking for what left those marks. It knows you're looking before you start." Eleanor was discharged from Briar Hill in December 1987. Dr. Crail's notes record that she was calm on her last day. She shook his hand. She thanked the nurses by name. At the door, she turned back and said something that Dr. Crail recorded verbatim in his private account. She said, "It was there before I was. I want you to understand that. Whatever I interrupted by being in those walls, whatever routine I disrupted, I was the intruder, not the other way around." She walked out into a cold Ohio morning and was never documented again. No last name, no forwarding address, no further records of any kind. Briar Hill Psychiatric Center was closed in 1991 following funding cuts and a separate, unrelated administrative scandal. The building stood empty for 11 years. It was demolished in 2002. During the demolition, workers reported something that made the local paper in a small article that ran once and was not followed up on. In the interior wall spaces, behind decades of plaster and insulation, the demolition crew found passages. Not structural passages, not maintenance corridors. Passages that appeared to have been deliberately cleared. Navigable, interconnected, running throughout the building from basement to roof. The foreman estimated, based on the scope and complexity of what they found, that the passages had been in use for a very long time. Much longer than 6 years. Much longer than the building had been standing. Whatever had been living in the walls of Briar Hill Psychiatric Center had been there before the hospital was built around it. And the only question that no one has ever been able to answer, the question that Dr. Crail wrote on the last page of his private account before he sealed it and left it with his attorney, with instructions that it not be opened until after his death, is this: when the building came down, where did it go? Because it went somewhere. And it is very good at not being found. If that true story kept you up, just wait until the next one. Make sure you like, comment, and share this video. It helps more people find the darkness and I want to hear from you. What would you have done? I post twice a week, so if you don't want to miss the next true story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Sleep lightly. I'll see you again soon.